Hi, Julie.
Hello, Olga. How lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So nice to have you in this program, The Days and Works of Julie Gerland.
That's it. That's me. For sure. Thank you.
So let's start with the time when you were conceived. What was the chrono, space, cultural context in
Wow.
you were conceived? When was that?
Okay, so I was conceived at the beginning of 1958, and it was in Hong Kong. So it was a whole other era back in those days. And my parents were young. My mother was, when she conceived me, she must have been 24, maybe 23 or 24. And she had already had my brother in Singapore. And now it was my turn to be born in Hong Kong. And
what was the situation in Hong Kong in late 50s?
It was a British colony. And my father was still at that time in the British Army. So he was stationed out there. And just after I was born, he left the army but stayed in Hong Kong. So I was born in the British Military Hospital, which is a very old building that is still standing today. They've kept it as a heritage building. And later on, I went to school in the same building. In fact, in the same room that I was born in. It's quite unusual, but it was the British Military Hospital. If you know Hong Kong at all, you see the island and the view of all the big buildings. Halfway up the peak, basically, is this old brown military hospital, which looks out over the port in Hong Kong, the harbour. So,
yes, actually, you are of British origin, right?
Absolutely. I am British. I have a British passport. And I moved directly from Hong Kong to live in France in 1986. And although I've lived in the UK a few months here and there, I've never lived in England. I've never been part of the system there.
Mm-hmm.
So
can you bring to us, can you bring some of the atmosphere of British mentality or culture as was experienced or transferred to Hong Kong in those years? What were the values, the main principles, the spirit of the British being in Hong Kong?
Well, that's a very interesting question. And I think there's no one standard answer. But from my parents' point of view, they didn't really have a childhood. It was very difficult upbringing for both of them. And so when they in Hong Kong, they had servants in the house. They didn't have to be there to look after us. My mother never cooked except for her own parties. They were out partying all the time. So they were living their adolescence, actually, as we were growing up. So my parents were very nice people, but they didn't know anything about parenting. And they were having a good time partying. Expat parties. So we were basically left, the three of us, to grow up on our own, which wasn't without its challenges, and also with our Chinese amahs who lived with us and who had the charge of looking after us, cooking for us, etc. And so I used to spend a lot of time sitting on a little stool in the back room where the amahs lived, and just hanging out with them. So I kind of grew up between the two cultures. On one side of the house was this British colonial, and then I would go the other side, and it would be the old Chinese, Cantonese style life of eating a bowl of rice and with a few vegetables and sometimes a bit of fish, rarely meat in those days. And we couldn't talk to each other because she didn't speak English, of just a few words. And I didn't speak Cantonese because it wasn't allowed to be taught in the schools there. We had to do the British system, and we had to learn French, which actually ended up quite useful for me, but not Cantonese. So I did learn a little bit, but it came later. So I kind of grew up with these two different cultures, very, very different cultures.
So actually, Julie, you bring a whole world to us now through your narrative. What would you say are the challenges? In few words, the 2-3 most important, significant challenges of the times, having to integrate or to be within 2 different cultures, 2 different systems, 2 different languages, etc.
I think that honestly, when I think back to my childhood, it wasn't so much the cultures that were a problem. That wasn't a source of stress for me. It was the parents who were never home. So, you know, I don't know what it's like to have a mother who's at home who cooks for me. In fact, my mother never cooked for me. So they used to fight over who was going to make the cheese on toast on Sunday because the maid was not there on Sundays. But cook, no. So to grow up as a child not wanting for anything, you know, we had food, we had a place to live, we had holidays, we had school, we had all these things, but no parents. And the model that they gave was that life is all about parties.
Yeah.
And I was completely the opposite. My life was all about how I felt inside. So I was not seen, I was not heard, I was not part of this world. It just didn't mean anything to me, their world. That was difficult. That was a challenge.
And at the same time, I listen to you and I think to myself, saying how nicely life prepares people to contribute to parenting.
For sure.
Yeah?
That's
Very
we
strange.
often learn what we need by what we don't have.
Yeah. So actually this loss it came or became your big opportunity.
Yes, and if I hadn't had the spiritual experience that I did have at the age of 16, I think it could have been very disastrous, a recipe for disaster.
Would you like to speak about that experience?
Well, that was really where my life really began. My parents were out of work, so they lost all their money. And my father didn't have a job, my mother neither. And so we were in the UK, and my father called us. It was summertime, we were on holiday, and my father called us and said, "Don't come home, we can't afford to keep you in Hong Kong." So he came to the UK. This is the only time I really lived in England. I was 15 when this happened. And a friend of ours lent us a house that they had, and they weren't living it because they were living in Hong Kong. So we had a house, but we had no money. So we were not part of the system. My parents were not entitled to anything because they had left the country for a long time. And so everybody was down and out. Everybody was depressed. And my sister said to my parents, "If you don't take me back to Hong Kong, I'm going to kill myself." So that was a bit of a shock. That's another whole story. I don't want to get into her story. But mine was, I was left in the house with my father alone. He was totally depressed, and we had nothing to get up for in the morning. We had no money. We couldn't go anywhere, couldn't do anything. I don't even know how we bought food, except on the Saturday, I had a job in a garage, and in the morning as a receptionist, and the afternoon I looked after the owner's 2 children. So I know I had that kind of little pocket money. And one night I was in bed, absolutely dark. We were in the middle of the countryside, which we weren't used to because Hong Kong is a 24-hour city. So there's always lights, always noise, always something going on. And there we were completely in this countryside, away from everything. And I started to hear that somebody had come into the house, like broken into the house. And I heard somebody coming up the stairs. And so, of course, my heart was racing and I had no idea what to do. And I thought to myself, well, there's nothing to steal here. We didn't have anything. We had very basic furniture and that was it. So what do I do? So I hid under the covers and said, well, hopefully this person will just see there's nothing here and go away. But then I heard the door handle open and I thought I was going to die of fright. And then again, this is pitch black, so I didn't actually see anything. But in my mind's eye, it was like I could see a figure in the dark walking to the middle of the room. And in the middle of the room where that figure was, I was peeking over the sheets, thinking, oh my goodness, this is the end. And suddenly this figure turned into a point of light, just a point. And within a few seconds, this point of light started to spread. And as it spread and spread and spread, I knew that it was not like somebody had turned on the light. And it engulfed me, it came into me. And in that moment, I felt all the opposite of fear. I felt completely safe, completely loved, completely known, in bliss. I just knew that we were connected to this universe, this web of life, which is eternal. And then I fell asleep, completely conked out. And the next morning, my father came in and he brought me a cup of tea. And I bolted up in my bed. And he looked at me because normally I had nothing to, as a teenager, I had nothing to get up for. And he said, oh, are you all right? And as he said that, I felt inside myself and I thought, wow, am I all right? This is like, wow. I felt so alive. I felt so loved. I felt so connected with like everything. I just knew that life was eternal, that we were all part of this web of life. And so he left looking, I said, yes, I'm fine. And a little voice said to me, there's no point telling your father, he won't understand. So I said, oh, okay. So I then went downstairs and I went outside. I was not used to being in the countryside and we didn't have any relationship really with nature. And there I was. Every blade of grass was light. And the sheep in the field, who usually ran away when we went out there to put the washing up, all came down. They were all lined up at the fence looking at me. And I was looking at the sheep. And I love these sheep. They were part of me. I was part of them. It was just like total bliss. And so then I thought to myself, well, okay, life has definitely changed. But like, what do I do with this? So my mother called from Hong Kong. And my father came to me and he said, oh, your mother called. She said there was a job available in Hong Kong. And I said, no, that's your job. He said, no, I didn't. I'm not going to do anything because it's not for me. He had no self-esteem. He said, I can't do it. And he just was not in the right frame of mind. And so I said, no, 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 that's your job. I had told him that everything would be all right. And I said, that's the job. That's the job for you. So I got him to call back, and he decided to apply. And as it was for an airline, they paid his trip back to Hong Kong because, because they had flights going back. And of course, he got the job, and then had the happiest 10 years after that in the job that he'd ever had. And I was left in the UK on my own with no money, with knowing not more than a handful of people, and thinking that, well, okay, well, what do I do now with this? Who else out there lives and feels what I'm living? I had no reference. I had just the party goers, Hong Kong expat lifestyle, and now suddenly this in a country that I didn't know. And so I went off on my adventure to find out how what I had lived fit in with the world, like who else was out there. And I had many, many different experiences. And each time I thought, well, there's something which is right in there, but that's not what I'm living. And so I just went from place to place. And as I did, I got to know what people in the world think, what they're living, what they do. I asked, well, what do you think what happens when you die, for example? And the answers that I got, I just said, well, they just don't know that we continue to live, that I just knew I had lived many, many lifetimes before, and that life continues. And so if they were telling me, no, you just go 6 feet under and you stay in the ground and that's it, you're dead, I just said, well, no, that's doesn't correspond with what I'm living. But I thought to myself, well, if this light and love exists, and it does, then why are we suffering? Why didn't I know this before? Why are people not living it? Why is not everybody living this like me? So that started another quest, which was, what's the origin of suffering? And that led me to a spiritual teacher, and his name is Omram Mikhail Ivanov. And when I learned in his teaching through his books and his talks, where he said, if we were to look after pregnant women in 50 years or just 2 generations, we could close all our prisons and all our hospitals. I just cried. I said, that's it. That's the answer. We have to look after pregnant women. But I thought to myself, well, I was 22 years old. I thought, what do I know about pregnancy? I didn't want to have children. I didn't want to get married. I was really very allergic to anything that was kind of medical. And so I basically just had to start. And I had a swimming school in Hong Kong, where finally, when my father got this job, I went back there, and then I continued traveling on my own a lot. But anyway, then I was back, and I started teaching children how to swim, because that's basically all that I knew how to do. And what happened was, as I was finding out that it was the prenatal period that, is the origin of our health, our well-being, how we think, how we're connected with our soul and everything. Lo and behold, pregnant mothers started to turn up at my swimming school, pregnant with their next child and their little toddler, saying, could you please teach my child to swim? Sorry, I have a hair there. So there I had these pregnant women. And about at the same time, I read Thomas Verney's book, The Secret Life of the Unborn Child. And that was like the first science that was coming out. And so there I had the spiritual side and the scientific validation. And I said, right, this is fantastic. Now I can tell people that what I was hoping to share with the mothers that that there was a scientific basis for it. And so that's really how I began. And the mothers were very happy to talk to me, because in those days, people didn't talk. They didn't talk about their feelings. They didn't talk about their intimate lives. These were expat mothers, most of them. And so they were far from their families. Communications in those days was just very expensive phone calls. So you used a phone call when you really had to say an emergency, but you didn't kind of hang on to the phone and just chat. And the mothers started opening up to me and telling me of their fears and their stresses, and so I was able to start giving them information from Thomas's book, saying a lot of people smoked in those days, and if it wasn't themselves smoking, the husbands would definitely have been smokers. There were very few non-smokers, and they would be smoking in the car, they would be smoking at home. And so I was able to take Thomas's work and say, we know this, that, you know, this is really not helpful for the development of your child. And then I realized this is not really very nice, because I'm giving them this information in the best intentions to help them. But in fact, I could see on their face that I was causing more stress. Because then they were, oh my goodness, I'm doing harm to my baby. Even if I put it in the nicest possible way, they would feel guilty. How can you, you know, in those days, very, very difficult to be in a non-smoke environment, a smoke-free environment. And so I said to myself, well, if I really want to help, then I have to be able to offer pregnant couples an alternative. So if you smoke, okay, would you like to give up? Because if you just said, well, stop smoking, it's very difficult to stop smoking. That's what I've learned. And so if I could say to them, we know that smoking is not optimal for your child, there will be consequences. And if you would like to give up smoking, we can help you. And I thought to myself, well, if I could say that, that would be so much better. So I embarked on a quest, really, to get myself to a level where I could really empower the parents. And that's how it all started.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing this very touching story of your early childhood and adolescent, early years of your adulthood, young adulthood. And as you complete this part of your narrative, bringing our attention to parents, in a way, just go a little bit back again to 1958, 59, 56, maybe. And what would you say are the best, were the best qualities of your mom?
That's a very good one. My mother was very jovial. And both my parents had incredible sense of humor. So when things got difficult, they would either go quiet, but they never raised their voice. They would go quiet, or they would end up laughing. They would just, one of them would crack a joke or say something stupid, they would start laughing, and it would be over. And so my mother had the possibility even to laugh at herself. I think that has really helped me even all my life, to have this, just this deep feeling that if you laugh at it, then it feels better. It feels better. So I would say definitely both of them had a very positive outlook on life, and incredible sense of humor. My father couldn't laugh at himself, my mother could. Basically a love for life, They were great travelers, explorers. They left home, their own country when they were young. They were adventurous from that point of view. And they loved different cultures. They loved different people. There was never, deep down, there's always some kind of racism I found, in time. Even because I married a Frenchman, and their thoughts about the French were the French. But deep down inside, they always treated people as people. So, and that was very, very beautiful for me. So I think they're probably the best qualities.
What was the name, or is the name, of your mom?
June.
June.
Like the month of June.
How old is she now?
She passed away during COVID, but she was born in 1933. Oh, so she would have been 90 this year. So in May, the end of May. So she would be coming up to 90, born in 33. Yeah. And my father, he passed away about 10 years ago now. And so he would have been born in 27. So he would have been, I don't know, you work it out.
What was the name of the father?
Peter.
Peter. So let's bring our attention to Peter for a while. And what do you think was the best quality? We already know that he also had a positive attitude and a sense of humor, a good sense of humor. What else was it that made Peter a very special person?
I think really, apart from the time when he was depressed, he was out of work, and that in a way is kind of normal to be depressed, I guess. But that he was very jovial, he was very positive. He would say affirmations to himself. For example, he would say, every day in every way, I'm getting better and better. Just like that. I grew up, hearing things like that. He was just repeating it to himself. So I think, but he was also very, very naive, incredibly naive. He never thought that any doctor or lawyer or professional person could ever do any harm. I was like, are you kidding? No, that professional people, they just would never hurt anybody. And obviously, that's very far from the truth. But somehow his naivety made him love people. From my point of view now, it's rather a superficial love. But he was jovial. He was the man who would help the old lady across the street and pull the chairs out, hold the door. Okay, it's things that he'd been taught, but he would do it lovingly. And it was just part of his persona. People loved him, and my mother. They were kind of like the life and soul of the parties. So they would be the first ones on the dance floor, and very glamorous. Everybody would be watching them. And so, yeah, so they brought this kind of positive, that life was there to be explored, not with the children. That was the bummer. The children were not part of the scene. But if you just take them in their life, my mother said, as she was passing over, she said, I've had a fantastic life, Jules. And that's what she really believed. So was she a fantastic mum? Absolutely not. I wouldn't wish that she as a mother on anybody, because she just wasn't there. And as children, we need to have parents with us. We need to have parents who spend time talking to us and who see our needs. I would come home from school and just lie on my bed and cry because there was nobody to talk to. And then my mother would make fun of me in front of her friends. She wants me to talk to her. I was like, any of the extra activities I had to do, I would have to go on my own. They never came to the school. They never came to any activities that we did. We were just basically left on our own. So there's two things. One is them as parents, and one as them as, you know, having a fantastic life for themselves.
Which area in Britain, from which place did they come from?
So my mother came from the Midlands, and so she was blonde and blue eyes, very fair skin. So I've always felt that she's come from the Vikings, except she wasn't very tall. So she comes really from the north. And my father had Scottish, Irish. Our family name was Ryan, which is an Irish name, and the middle name is MacLean. So it's really the Celtic background of dark hair, very curly, Irish, Scottish.
Again, there is a polarity here, eh?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And he was born in the British Military Academy just south of London. So, because his father was also in the army, but he lost his parents both of them when he was very young. And my mother lost her parents as well. Right. So, but they eloped, they ran away and illegally got married. So that's a whole story too.
How old were they when their parents passed away or disappeared from their life?
They both lost their fathers when they were very young. So my father was 2 when his father died.
Really?
And my mother was 5 when her father died.
Right.
And so their mothers had very hard time looking after the children. Mm. So it was very, very tough for them. Very, very tough. And so they ran away to get married together when my mother was 19. And in those days, you had to be, you weren't allowed to get married unless you had your parents' permission under the age of 21. And so they falsified my mother's mother's signature and got married illegally. But they stayed married for 62 years. So I guess it was the right decision for both of them.
Yeah. Have you met these grandmothers yourself?
All my grandparents passed away before I was born. And so I grew up in Hong Kong with no extended family. No uncles, aunts, grandparents, nothing whatsoever. No roots, because we were a minority living in China. You know, 98% of the population was Chinese, which we couldn't even speak to. It wasn't the thing that the expats learned Chinese in those days. So it was quite, we couldn't really have any kind of real nature. All the food came in from overseas. So I thought the broccoli grew in a plastic bag, which is strange now when we grow our own food, because I was just totally cut off from any kind of family roots and even the roots to the earth. So we had a boat. We went out on the boat every Sunday for many, many years. And so I was always in the water. I became a very good swimmer. And that's why I was teaching swimming. So I feel very, very comfortable in water. But the earth was strange, because if you live in a big city, you're disconnected from the earth. And there's no countryside in Hong Kong. Well, there is actually a little bit, but it's mountainous. So you don't kind of walk into a field as we would in Europe, but you could climb a mountain. So yeah, it's a very, very strange sort of upbringing.
Have you heard any stories about your maternal grandparents or your father's grandparents?
A little bit, yes.
Would you like to share the most significant, in your understanding, story of these grandparents?
Well, I would say actually the most significant for me is that when I was young, so this is probably started when I was maybe 6 or 7, I actually started to see my grandmother. and she had passed away before I was born. And so my experience with my grandmother is that she would come at the times when I told you I was crying in my room, and she would talk to me. And so one day when I was about 10 years old, 10, 11 years old, I asked my mother, I said, do you think it's possible that your mother would be here? And she was a bit kind of like, what do I say to this? And fortunately, she said, well, she said, it's possible. And I said, well, it's not just possible. I said, she's here. So she said, oh, well, before she died, she said that she would always be here looking after her daughter. So I said, no, she's not looking after you. She's looking after me. And of course, if somebody's looking after your child, it's the same thing for a mother. You're looking after you. So I could see this smile on her face. That was very significant for me because somewhere I still had a grandmother. And I would see her, and then I would just feel her. I would just know when she was there. Both the grandmothers suffered a lot. They had a difficult life because they lost their husbands, and they had children. They were very poor. My maternal grandmother had very ill health, so she couldn't even look after her children because she was in and out of hospital. And which is one of the reasons why my mother ran away, because she didn't want to be just looking after the house and her younger brother. And for my father's mother, he has a fantastic memory of her, but he was basically went to orphan school. And so he would just see his mother, maybe 2 or 3 times a year, and said that she was absolutely fantastic. Well, of course, she was the only one who really cared for him. But 2 or 3 times a year for a little boy to see his mother is really not much. So there's not a lot that I can really say, about them. I think they were good people. I never heard any kind of bad story from my parents or anything. Same with my parents, very good people. But, a hard life. And I think my parents felt very fortunate because although they came from a poor and challenging upbringing, they ended up traveling the world, staying in like the best hotels, meeting amazing people, having friends all over the world, hosting incredible parties and being invited by a lot of people. As I said, they were kind of like the life and soul of the parties. People loved to have them. And they did a lot of, kind of adventurous things. My mother had her own business. And so I think their idea was that they had this difficult life, but they didn't really want to connect with it. Now they had turned the page, they were living something else, and that's what counted for them.
What kind of business was your mom in?
So my mother had, she started off in import-export. So in China and Hong Kong, as you probably know, everything was made in Hong Kong at one point. She would do the opposite. She would import clothes from the UK for the expats. But she did lots of very unusual things. For example, she had a modeling agency at one point. And so she was teaching people. She did a lot of fashion shows. And she even organized fashion shows on cruise ships. So she would fly to Japan with all these clothes and be on board. And for the passengers, she would dress them. And the passengers, women, would be the fashion show. And so they would learn how to walk and have these nice clothes. They would put on a fashion show for the other people on the ships. And then when they got into Hong Kong, they would all go to her shop and buy all the clothes. So she did that on many occasions. And that got us into, as well, to cruising. because we used to go from Hong Kong around to the UK or whatever, wherever we were going, by ship. So as a child, we were used to being on board ships for anything from 2 to 6 weeks.
Mm.
And again, that was fantastic for my parents because they didn't have to look after us. There was all the activities organized for the children, and they were busy having a good time.
Yeah.
But it gave me a love for being on cruise ships, which I still have today.
Yeah, actually, I see that there are a lot of similarities. You also organize parties, but not in the same way. You organize congresses now and conferences, and you network a lot of people from different parts. So your parents are still alive in their best aspects of theirs.
Yes, I hadn't really seen it like that, but yes, they were both very social,
Yeah.
and connecting people up was very important for them.
And your brothers, or there were sisters as well?
I have an older brother and a younger sister.
Right.
And, their lives were.
What are their names, and what is the age difference since you are the middle child? Yeah.
So my brother is 3 years older than me and lives in Scotland. And now he's a pilot, or was a pilot. And my sister, I believe, I'm not quite sure, but lives in Spain, but I don't actually know where she is today. And she's 18 months younger than me.
Right. So very close after your birth, your mom was pregnant again and gave birth to the youngest sister. What is the name? I did not get
Her
it.
name is Deborah.
Deborah. And the brother?
Robert.
Robert and Deborah, right. And what is the best that you remember from your siblings, and which you think were significant contributors to your own becoming?
Oh, that's interesting. My brother was very, very adventurous. He was hyperactive, always doing things. And I was really the little girl. You know, I didn't like getting my hands dirty. I didn't want to climb trees. I didn't want to fall over. I didn't want to do all this stuff. And so he would be always trying to get me to try things out. He wanted to push me down the slide. He wanted me to swing on the trees. He wanted me to jump over great things and climb mountains and stuff. And I was not that keen. So he would dress me up in his clothes, you know, his like a leather jacket, and say, "Come on, Jules, come on, you've got to come." And he would get me into some pretty scary, some pretty frightening experiences. And he was an adrenaline junkie from the beginning. And I liked to be at home, feeling good. I was a feel-good kid. So I realized very early on that this whole stress thing was really not me. Mm-hmm. And it was actually quite interesting because he would be so stressed out, but because he was getting himself into all these different adrenaline situations, that he would lie down on his tummy on the floor, and he would ask my sister and I to tickle his back. So he would have no shirt on, and he would say, "Please tickle my back." And so we would do it as, you know, younger sisters for a little while. And then we would stop because we'd had enough. And he would say, "Oh, no," he said, "I'll pay you just another 50 cents worth." So he used to pay us out of his pocket money to tickle his back. Now, many years later, I work obviously to help people to transform their stress and their fear, because we understand what that does to the body, right? So I realized that when he got us to do this to him, that we were actually neutralizing the stress hormones and getting the endorphins to start to be secreted, where it was the only time where he could just relax and completely chill out and allow his body to actually function correctly. And so now I actually teach this all over the world. And
Sounds
often
like the
I tell
butterfly massage. It sounds like kind of butterfly massage to activate.
exactly, it's what we call light touch.
Yeah.
And so I often tell the story of him because I said, I used to do it for myself. But sometimes when you do something for yourself, you don't actually even realize you're doing it. But him, it was like, you have to do this, do my back. So I remember, my arm, holding my arm up, trying to do that. And then, I could see that, in fact, his stress all his life has led him to 2 major heart attacks, loss of his pilot's license. And basically, it all comes down to stress. So that was a great lesson for me as to, I've watched it obviously over the years, but how stress is really very harmful. And yes, we can neutralize it. And that actually it's a self-preservation that people find it on their own because they absolutely need it. A child cannot continuously live in stress. It is going to lead to chronic disease and death. And so they have to find something that relieves the stress.
So Robert was really very creative, and actually it cost him very little money at the end of the day. What
It
is
was his own demise, really, because, he became obese.
Yeah.
And now he's very happy, actually. But, he's had 5 wives, not at the same time. But I just can see he's adorable. I love him so much, and he's so creative. He's amazing at whatever he puts his hand to. But maybe I can tell, as we're talking about Robert, a little story, which was one of the first stories that I could really be able to connect the prenatal with the postnatal. Because when I was starting to learn this from Thomas Verney, and then obviously the other pioneers who started in the early 1980s, I started, of course, asking my mother, what did you live when you were pregnant with me, when you were pregnant with my sister, when you were pregnant with my brother, etc. And she kept saying, oh, I can't remember, we just live, and I don't know. And one day she said, I remember. So we said, like, tell me. And she remembered she was in Singapore, and it was in the afternoon. It's very hot and humid there. And she's very pregnant. She goes to lie down in the afternoon. And as she goes into her room, there's a big snake that's curled up, and he must hear her coming. And he untwines, and he goes over the floor, over the window, and into the garden. And she screams. And so my father comes. He's the hero. And don't worry, I'll find it. And he goes out, he finds a snake, kills it. And it's a big, long snake. And they didn't really know anything about snakes. And so first time in the tropics, they went to the botanical gardens with the snake, and they wanted to find out, if we see one of these again, is our life in danger? Is it poisonous? What do we do with this? So they said, no, that's just a harmless tree snake or grass snake. There's no problem with that whatsoever. It won't harm you. It's not venomous, no problem. So my mother was absolutely struck with grief that this innocent being had been killed because of her. And the innocent being just wanted to rest in the shade just like she did. in the heat of the afternoon. And this grief, now what happened was when my brother was very young, 3 years older than me, he came to me one day in the house that we lived in, and he said, Jules, I have to take you downstairs to the basement. He said, I want to show you something. So he takes me by the hand. I follow him down the stairs in the dark, and he has this shoebox, and he opens the shoebox, and there inside was cotton wool at the bottom, and there inside is a snake. I look at it, and he says, don't worry, Jules, don't worry. It won't harm you. It's just, and he picks it up and he strokes it, and he said, he's my friend. He said, but the thing is that it's starting to get cold. And he said, I don't want the snake to get cold. So I have to take the snake upstairs into the house. And so I have to tell mom and dad that I'm going to keep the snake. I was like, ugh. Like, what are they going to say with a snake, So anyway, I must have been about 5 years old. He must have been about 8. And so I go with him. He's got the shoebox, and he says, Mom, can I talk to you? And I want to show you something. So I remember her sort of saying, yes, what have you got there? And what is it? And so anyway, he says, I have a friend, and the friend is cold, and I have to bring the snake up. What? Snake? Open the box and says, don't worry, Mum, it won't hurt you. He or she's my friend, and he's got to stay here. And so, of course, my mother just didn't have the heart to say, no, 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 you have to throw it away. So the snake stayed. And my brother used to save up all his pocket money and go down to the Chinese markets and buy up, because the Chinese eat snakes and they eat the bile of the snake. So there would be these huge big cages with loads of snakes inside. And he would buy them with his pocket money and bring them home and keep them. And we always thought by the time he was 15, he was an Asian snake specialist. We lived with pythons, we lived with all kinds of different snakes in a house and then in a small apartment. Okay, so he even toilet trained his 6-foot python. So he loved them. And we always thought, where did he get this from? It's really strange. And then my mother told me the story. I said, wow, now that explains why Robert had this immediate thing, I've got to save the snake.
Yeah.
Because my mother wasn't able to save the snake when she was pregnant with him. And she had this remorse that this poor innocent life had been lost because of her for no reason. And so he was like, he somehow downloaded that and said, I've got to look after snakes. There's nothing wrong with them. They're wonderful beings. And he had this passion.
Excellent. Excellent.
So that was really one of my first stories where I said, okay, now I'm beginning to really see this connection. And then, of course,
and your relationship with Deborah as children, or as you grew up?
As children, we grew up, we were very close. And we actually lived a lot in trance together. So we would be in our imagination, and we would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, and we would see things in the room that weren't actually physically there. So we lived a lot in this this trance world. That's all I can say, really. And unfortunately, that didn't end up very good for her. She went through really, really a lot of huge challenges, huge. So I don't feel it's fair to talk about that here in public. That's her life. I think she's done the best out of it, but huge challenges.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, one of the consequences of growing up in Hong Kong, where the parents were just not present.
Yeah.
So a lot of drugs were available. I never did anything like that, but others did. And, you know, it's so easy if you don't feel loved or you don't really have your place, even if you are loved, if you don't feel it and receive it from your parents on a daily level, then you don't really have any self-esteem. And you're looking for it in places where people will take advantage of that. And that leads into a kind of downward spiral.
Yeah. So you started speaking about your inspirators and the early stages of your work in the field of prenatal psychology. So you spoke about Aitmatov and you spoke about Thomas Verney. Are there more people along the path that inspired you and brought something, an added value, or brought you to new directions? Who are they?
Definitely. Well, I started after I had my swimming school. I started actually a holistic parenting program, and this was during preconception, although nobody was really interested in those days. But I started talking about it during pregnancy. We did prenatal bonding, and
What is the year, Julie?
oh well, this was in the 80s.
80s.
And so what happened is, obviously, growing up with these pioneers, as you know, from APA, many of them, the congresses that were happening, people were starting to come together. And with my possibility to travel, I've always been able to travel. My father worked for the airline, and then I married a pilot. And so it was easy for us to have people come to our house in France once I got married and we moved to the south of France with Francois. We had this parenting program, and there was a congress in the south of Spain, and Thomas went and David Chamberlain went. And when I heard that David was going to be in Europe, and we're just on the border with Spain, we invited him and his wife, Donna, to come and stay with us. And in those days, so we're now talking about probably 91 or 2 at the latest. And David was pioneering, David Chamberlain, and an incredible work that he did was that he was combing all the scientific literature to find anything about the prenatal baby or a newborn baby. And this is at a turning point where these pioneers were discovering something totally different about newborns. And David was at the foremost kind of frontier of this knowledge. And so he and his wife, Donna, came and stayed with us for 10 days. And it was incredible because we invited people over and to listen to David. And he would be just telling us with all his excitement, you know, we now know this and we've learned that and we've discovered this. And he was putting it together, which nobody did. Because if somebody was just in one silo, in one discipline, they were only just seeing that. But as a psychologist, he was zooming in and he was taking a bit of this and a bit of that and putting this, the mind of the newborn, which was the name of his book, together. And so this was a fantastic experience. Not only David and Donna are some of the most beautiful, beautiful people that I've ever met in my life, on a personal level. Just, there's no words to describe the beauty of these two souls. But their work was absolutely stunning. And at the end, I had written a little book, and I asked David to read it. And he said, oh, I'll write the foreword to the book. So he wrote the foreword. And then in this little booklet, it wasn't a proper book, it was like a booklet to accompany a kind of a game that I had invented. And in the book, I had said all about the prenatal time. And then I said, well, when it comes to your birth, I said, just go and find somebody like Michel Audin and have a nice birth. And he said, Julie, he said, because people would come to our place to do the prenatal bonding, he said, you can't just leave them at the birth. And I was thinking, I can't? Me? Something to do with the birth? And it was such a strong, so when he left, I was left with, Julie, you can't just leave them at the birth. These people are following you. They're following your way of understanding things. You have to take them through the birth process. Now, I was in shock because, first of all, I never wanted children. I didn't know anything about birth whatsoever. And so I thought, my goodness, how am I going to enter into this world that is totally and utterly foreign to me? And so the first thing I did was I said, well, I'm going to invite a few friends over who I knew had natural births and ask them just to talk about their birth. And I would be just passive like a sponge. And they would just talk and I would just take it all in without trying to analyze it. And so that's how I started, thanks to David. And of course, then that led to hypnobirthing and you know, to other understandings and teaching and everything for decades after that. But the influence of David, and I say Donna together because they were very much a team. She was not a psychologist. She didn't do that work, but they were a team. And Donna, I believe, is still alive. I'm still in touch with her. She must be close to 100 now. And David and well, both of them are in my heart. And thanks to him saying that, he pushed me over the edge to continue my own development in this and to really looking at and understanding, so what is this whole thing about birth?
And Julie, from that moment on, we are early 80s now. Something
from David was the early 90s.
90s, all right, thank you. Until now, can you choose the 3-4 most significant moments, you know, the highlights of your journey in this work?
I'd say one of them is my inner work, because that always comes first. That's just what I do, is a self-exploration. So looking at my own birth, looking at my own life, going deep into my own roots. Why am I like this? Why do I have this? And that for me is definitely a highlight. I can't imagine my life without that. And I think it's a big missing piece in a lot of professionals' life today. So I would put that in first place. Secondly, I think I would put, what would I do? Probably the two things that I have done, apart from really accompanying couples from preconception now, obviously, to afterbirth, I would say one is becoming a professional trainer, which is when I started in 2005 to teach professionals. There I started having more impact because it was not just one-on-one where you can do a great job, you can help a certain amount of people. When you've gone, and nobody continues. When you become a trainer, you have much, much more reach. I have thousands and thousands of students who have trained with me, and they are helping others. So that's when you start to feel that you have impact. And when you've gone, you will leave a legacy. people will be remembering me and what I taught and taking it further, hopefully. So I think that is really important for me. And the other one is the work at the United Nations. Because
how did it start? How did you get there?
Well, I had actually already worked for an NGO in 1980 at New York at the United Nations called Planetary Citizens. We actually gave out planetary passports. So the idea that we're all citizens of the planet and we're human beings, and we should all have the same rights. So I had already done that. So I knew what it was like to be at the UN, to have a pass, to go in, but I was 21. And when I have a colleague, she invited me to come to Spain and to give a weekend workshop to some doctors, midwives, and also pregnant couples and future parents on preconception. What could they do before conceiving? And so I went for this weekend, and at the end of the weekend, she told me, just taking me to the airport, she said, obviously fantastic. We just had 2 wonderful days. People really enjoyed it. And she said, oh, the organization that I'm the vice president of has just got accreditation at the United Nations. So I said, wow, congratulations. What are you going to do with that? And she looked totally, she was driving, she looked totally overwhelmed. And she said, I don't know. We don't know what to do. And because I had lived in New York and worked at the United Nations, for a non-governmental organization, not employed by the UN, I said, oh, and my friend spoke Spanish. She doesn't speak English. The UN, you really have to speak English. And so she was not used to traveling. I could get on a plane. My husband's a pilot. We fly all over the place. We take a plane like we take a bus. Other people take a bus. And so I said, oh, well, I can help if you want. I know what to do. So she saw and communicated with the members of this organization and called me up, and she said, everybody's really happy to have your help. Yeah, help us. So it was voted in that I would be the chief UN representative of this organization. And so we received an invitation to participate at an event in New York. And I said, that's it, I'm going. So I went. It wasn't at all a meeting that we could really talk about our subject, but it was a foot in the door. We started then advocating for the prenatal. Nobody knew. So this is, 20 years ago now. Nobody in the NGOs, nobody knew anything about this. So I started going to every single meeting that I could. Every time there was a meeting on health, global health, I would be there. And with the help of my husband, who was obviously, Francois, you know him, completely part of the team. I couldn't have done practically anything without his support and help. He started making all the documents. So on the computer, we made documents, we made a film in the old, CDs. We bought a machine, we printed the CDs ourselves, DVDs rather, not CDs. And we would give them out at all the meetings. And people would be really kind of quite surprised. And there we would quote Thomas Burney, David Chamberlain, all these pioneers that you know very well. And I had got to know even better because I started going to the APA conferences. I then started presenting at the APA conferences. And, basically we were all the pioneers together, each bringing an aspect of something which was emerging. And so every time we could go to a UN meeting, we would be there with these documents. And so I soon had a team of people who would help me in New York. We would go to the Commission on the Status of Women every March. And because I thought, well, there's thousands of people coming from all over the world interested in women, they must be interested in mothers. And of course, nobody was thinking that it could actually be the mother and a pregnant mother who could have anything to do with the global situation. This for them was just like chalk and cheese, as we say in English. And we were bringing them together, saying global peace starts in the womb. Global health starts in the womb. Happiness, all these things that we're all looking for, thriving humanity, starts in the womb. So eventually, we went to Rio +20, which was the Earth Summit. The first Earth Summit was in '92, and thousands of people got together in Rio to discuss the state of the planet. And we weren't there in '92, but when we knew that this was going to be happening in 2012, I said, that's it. How can we talk about the state of the planet without this? And so it was very difficult, very last minute, but with my guidance, I was able to get some sponsoring partners. So I got 2 or 3 other organizations, including ICM, the International Confederation of Midwives. Unfortunately, they couldn't come on their own. I mean, physically, it was a lot of money and everything. It was very expensive, last minute. But they said, yes, you can put our name. So I got a number of NGOs. We got together a team. Michel Audin, who I'm sure you know, was actually in Brazil, in Rio at that time. And I said, can you come and speak on this panel? And he said, absolutely. So we had a panel right in the middle of Rio +20, where the whole world was coming together to talk about how we can have sustainable development. Now, of course, we know there's a huge amount of corruption and this and that. But anyway, this was still the biggest conference ever held worldwide on the state of the planet. And we were there talking about, if we want peace, if we want health, if we want all these things, we have to start from conception. And we gave out documents, we gave a talk. All these talks were recorded, and all the governments get copies of all the talks, because obviously they can't go to all the talks. And so I think that was really one of the turning points. And then, well, we did many other events as well, but which led up to 2018, when suddenly there was this nurturing care document that came out, and almost word for word, it was what we had been giving them in our documents, except they made a mistake. They said, we have now had this science for 30 years, because that's what we would put. But by the time they got it in 2018, it was 40 years. I laughed because I thought they really have copied what I put, but they didn't realize that the dates. So basically, they had taken what the documents that we had been giving them and validated it, obviously. And then all the NGOs, everybody started to talk about it, because it meant that all the countries had signed off, because this was a UNICEF, WHO, World Bank document. that all the countries now knew about this. And so I thought, great, now, I can move on to something else. But soon after that, I realized two things. One is, these people, if they haven't done their own work, what they're saying, what they want to change, is still coming through the lens of their own trauma, of their own understanding of what life is about. And I thought to myself, that's just not going to do it. We're not going to get the results here. And so the second thing was they just don't know. They have tunnel vision. They're in their silos. And everybody at the UN was talking about, we're all in our silos. We have to get out of our silos. But nobody knew how we can start to work together multidisciplinary and with a humanitarian outlook, and not just be happy that we have science and put it in a drawer. Oh, we know this, but how are we going to implement it? What changes? And of course, then you come across all the vested interests of the people who don't want things to change. And so obviously we were back in the swing of things, saying now we have to really provide programs now that the door is open, because before everybody was saying, no, this doesn't exist. Now we had the proof, we had the papers, but now is, okay, we know this, what are you doing about it? Oh, well, we don't know what to do. We'll show you, we'll help you. And so whether it's academics, whether it's maternity hospitals or birth centers or whatever the field, we act as consultants and teach them how they can change themselves, because we've all been through this birth process. And what does it really mean to translate this information into new practices? And that's now the implementation where we have to go. So it's the personal and the actual physical acts, the physical practices.
So Julie, to sum it up, you started with an experience not that happy in terms of parenthood. Then under some circumstances, you realized that there is something else going on here, and I can be of some good service in this field. You got inspired by Aitmatov, Vernie, Chamberlain, and you started working, and then you got involved in training the trainers, and then you were the one who brought these issues, these important issues to the United Nations, and then you started working into knowledge translation and supporting these committees, people, policymakers, whatever they are called, how to implement these theories into practices that have a meaning for the people, right?
That's a pretty fair summary.
So, Julie, if you were to speak to young people, young adults who are starting their own, I wouldn't like to say career, but their own contribution to society, what would you like to share with them as important piece of information? I wouldn't say advice, but
I go back now to basics. How do we all want to feel? We've been taken out of how we feel We're all looking for, a job or a career or this or that or a husband but what about you? And nobody has really said that to us. It was all the opposite of my parents, right? Is I was crying out saying, well, what about me? I exist. What about my feelings? What about, my sadness? What about what I'm living? And so this is where I can touch people and say, what about you? Let's get real. You're a human being. What do you want? And I said this recently to a group of people, and I said, don't you want to be loved unconditionally? Don't you want to be seen for who you are? Not what you're doing, but just you. And feel this connection, feel that you're okay, feel that you have your place, that you are loved, that you are intact. And you don't have to strive to become something to gain some kind of approbation. You are. And this is enough. And I want every baby to feel that they're just loved for who they are. And that's what I felt in the spiritual experience that I had. I didn't have to do anything or be anything, but just accept that we are loved. And this goes to a lot of barriers and touches people because, in fact, that's what we all want. And not many of us have had it or have it because we're always looking on the outside for something. And it's a deeply personal feeling that anybody can have at any time.
And then, Julie, if you were to communicate something of importance to young adults thinking of getting together as a couple or starting their own family, what would you like to communicate to them?
Well, honestly, right now, I would say I really highly recommend you do our training because like that, we can't just tell you, but we can now hold your hand and take you through a process where you will really step into your power. You will not just be battered about by life and about the inner voices that we've heard as well we're young from our parents, but actually be who you are. What have you got to contribute? I can help you now to get there. And so that was why we did these programs, because that's what people need. You can't just tell somebody, well, look, don't be afraid. Everybody seems to be stressed out a max these days. And we all know that if you say to somebody who's stressed, look, don't be stressed, you stress them even more, right? That happens to my husband. And so we don't do that, do we? We give the ways and means. How can you actually now incorporate this into your life so that you transform this stress and fear into love and well-being? That's really the first, because if you haven't got that empowerment and you can't do that whenever you want to, then how can you do the rest?
And Julie, if you were to bring a message to all these decision makers and policy makers and politicians, no matter where on the world, what would your message be?
That, there's no point trying to change things on the outside. It's human beings that are the cause of the problems. And where does a human being become violent or peaceful is in the womb. So truly, if we want to, what Omraam Mikhailavinov said, if we want to close our prisons and close our hospitals, then we must put resources and time and understanding to empower everybody, actually, because it's not just the pregnant mothers, what we're saying, it's the professionals as well who work with them, that everybody's got to do their own work. Otherwise, they're always seeing the world and what they're doing through their broken lens of trauma. And that's what they're going to keep perpetuating, and that's what's happening, because we've had this knowledge for 40 years. probably close to 50 years, and for civilizations, because this is not new knowledge, as you know. The Greeks had it, the Chinese had it, the Egyptians have it. This is old. The Indians have it in the Vedas. So this knowledge has always existed. But the thing is that, it's what everybody says in the United Nations, we know how to stop all the problems. It just needs political will. We've got to want to. If we want to do this, then we know how. And the first step is to look at how we bring souls, because they're not blobs, right? Souls who are incarnating into the world so that they are intact, they're connected with innate intelligence, because yes, everything is intelligent. We've forgotten that in medical science. Everything is intelligent. Our body is intelligent. We can interact with everything and should be interacting with everything. And love is the first thing. And where is the love in your politics? Where is the love in your science? Where is the love in what we implement, how we treat mothers, how we treat children? Love is absent. And not only that, it's a taboo word. You know, sex is not a taboo word, but love is. And you know, and everybody wants to be loved. So why are we saying, you know, so we have to come back to the basics. The basic human being's need is to be loved.
Excellent. And Julie, because professionals and the systems, the academia, the educational programs, the universities, etc., have a big influence on what a professional quality will be later on in these people graduating. What would your message be to these scholars, academia, university directors, rectors, etc., etc.?
I think it's what I've told recently. The Clinical Psychology Society of India, is that when we're at home, now I was talking to Indian people, but it could be anybody, is we have one set of values. We get married or we're with somebody. Why? Because we love them. And then suddenly we go into school or academia or science, and this idea of love is gone. And so what I say is that this divorce of head and heart is causing a huge, you know, amount of suffering. So we need, and it's the objective and the subjective. So science says, yes, but it has to be objective. Well, what's wrong with the subjective? It exists just because you can't measure it. Everybody knows how you feel is subjective. Is it important? Absolutely. Do we buy something because of all? No, it's because how we feel. So we must take the subjective, or the right side of the brain and the left side of the brain, and work them together. We must take the mind and the heart together. We must take man and woman together now to be whole.
Synthesis. To work on this, on synthesizing the two polarities, bringing together the two poles. Is this what you are communicating?
I wouldn't necessarily saying synthesizing, but in everything that we do, bring in the subjective. How do you feel? Because it does affect. We know that it does affect what happens in the laboratory. So this whole subjective, which has been banished, you know, I was at a scientific conference in Barcelona, and Francois and I, it was quite interesting because I gave a presentation, and the people who were in the front row were the highest in science and academia. And when I gave my talk, which was full of love and compassion and humanity and all that, there was a man sitting in the front with a dark suit on, and he sat there like this, and he said, women should be made to do what we tell them to do. And I thought, wow, there's not much love in there, is there? And then we went to another meeting, and it was all about natural remedies. There were people sitting on the floor, there were families, there were women in long dresses, everybody was welcome. There was love and in the room. And it was a small room. And the other ones is huge, big rooms with only 5 rows of scientific people sitting there. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. Just feel the difference here. So we then went out and we were back into the mainstream scientific room. And somebody said something that I thought, wow, that's starting to feel good. And Francois and I started to clap. We got told off. We said, this is a scientific meeting. We do not show any emotion here. And I thought that's like saying to somebody, you're not allowed to bring your arms into the room or your heart into the room. You have to leave it outside. We're mutilated. They want us to be handicapped. We're not a human if we don't have feelings. And so this, for me, has just gone far too far. And, you know, we don't want it anymore. I don't want to be told I'm not allowed to express my emotion. I have emotions. It's part of who I am. It's not the only thing I am. But who has the right to tell me or anybody else or a pregnant mother or a child that they can't have emotions? I've never heard of anything so hideous. I never accept that. I never would accept it. It's inhumane. So my message is, stop, basta. We all want to feel good. And we don't always feel good. And we need to change this so that we all feel good, because we would start caring for each other if we felt good. We would start sharing with everybody if we felt good. We want to feel good. It's better for our health. It's better for our intelligence. We have all the science that shows that. So this is all the feminine side. Women, and I've been teaching, you know, couples birth preparation now for over 20 years, nearly 25 years. And what does the woman feel is she feels what I feel is not right. So she expresses a feeling, and the husband will look and say, you know, well, you know, and I say to them now, right at the beginning, I say, look, let's get this straight. What your wife says, from now on, you're just going to say, yes, dear. So they laugh, of course. Stereotype. Just yes, dear. That's all. It's that kind of like, huh? So I said, so it's very easy. If your wife says she's cold and it's very hot in the room, don't argue. Because a man's tendency is going to be, you can't possibly be cold in here. It's hot. I said, this is finished. If a woman says she's cold, get her a blanket. That's it. If she says she's hot, open the window or put the aircon on or something. She's cold. Stop arguing. What she feels is what she feels. But don't tell her she's wrong. And I've had women cry. So nobody's ever listened to me. So if she says, I don't feel well, don't go to a doctor to tell you whether you're sick or not. You don't feel well. And that's valid. If I almost died at the age of 2, and if it hadn't have been for my mother's deep feeling, she went against the doctors and saved my life. Because she said, I know my daughter, she doesn't just cry, there's something that's really wrong. And I had a burst appendix, and the doctor sent my parents home with me to give me aspirin or something to make me sleep. If my mother had given that, I would have been dead. And she didn't. She said, I don't want to do that. I know there's something wrong with my child. So fortunately, my father had the right intuition to listen to her, but many men don't. They say, no, the doctor knows best. He told you to do this. We have to do it. But no, mother's feelings, you know, in many situations are more right, more accurate than what anybody outside can tell you.
Again, it is back to basics, connect with who you are, listen to your voice, listen to the inner wisdom,
Yes.
and take the next step.
Yeah,
Now,
and we have to
Julie,
start listening to mothers. We have to start listening to our bodies. We have to listen to nature. We have to listen to everything that's feminine. And for that, we have to quieten down the mental and
okay.
open up the right side of the brain, which feels, which just says, I know.
Yeah.
I loved it. We invited an African doctor to come to our summit last year. Now, he is an amazing man. He is a Western trained obstetrician, but he's also an African, and he's an African doctor, witch doctor. And he lives by the African principles. And I loved his closing word on a panel. He said, you in the West, you have knowledge. He said, we Africans, we know. I thought, wow. Because they're in touch with who they are inside, with how they feel. I'm not talking about every African now, but traditionally, and they have in Africa, they've been treating certain diseases that the West has no treatment for. They've been doing it for thousands of years, and they just know. They don't have laboratories. They just know. They know which plant to give to what, and they've had no problems with these things. So this thing between knowing and knowledge has now got to be friends.
Right. And Julie, is there anything that you would change if you went back?
Going back is not really my thing, but if I went forward, so for example, if I'm now preparing my next life, definitely I would put on my, wish list.
Yes, wish list.
Wish list is to have really conscious parents, conscious creators, who really validate that we are above and beyond everything. We are souls, and that we don't come in with a clean slate. We come in with our previous experiences. We come in with our gifts to give. And this needs to be honored. I would love to have been honored for who I am, for what I'm bringing to the world, which is unique. I will never be somebody else. So I can't, it's not even a role model, because I have to be me. I can be inspired by people, and I'm inspired by many people. But at the end of the day, everybody else is taken. I can't be them. I have to be me. So I have to be true. So this is what, if this was validated for me right at the beginning of my life, whether it was this one or the next one, it would make all the difference. All the difference. And for me, that is basic respect for the whole human being. And many cultures, for example, the Tibetan culture, they have this. They know when a baby comes in that it is a soul, and that it's bringing wisdom. And maybe as a teacher, maybe, for the parents, maybe knows much more than the parents. But at the moment, as they're little, they're vulnerable, but they're not stupid. They're incredibly intelligent. We are incredibly intelligent. Nature is intelligent, and we can interact with that. That was one of the things that I really learned from David Chamberlain, is at that time when he was here in 30 years ago, he was starting to have incredible results when babies didn't want to turn into the vertex position to prepare for birth. He would just talk to them and ask them, and they would turn. And so this is what I've been doing for 30 years, and it just works. Why? Because the body is intelligent and we can interact and talk to the body and get replies. And so is the baby. So if you explain to the baby and say, look, this is not really very helpful for your birth. It could cause a cesarean, which in some cases the mothers were allergic to anesthetic, and that's not going to be very helpful. It, could actually cause your departing. So we're really asking you, please, to turn, and then the baby turns. So this idea that everything is alive, everything is intelligent, and that we can interact with it, whether it's our own cells or a mother with her baby or nature around us, even the stars, I think is the new paradigm. And when you start sending your love out, you do hear everything is talking, everything is alive, everything is having its experience, and we're interacting, in fact, in the whole of the universe, which is alive and intelligent. I think this is the main shift that we need to all make. And life then becomes, wow, it's just so incredible, because we're never alone. Everything is alive. We're always loved. And it just keeps getting better. And I wish that for every single, not only human being, every single being. Because that for me is what life is now.
Julie, it has been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much for this inspiration, for the many years of the diligent, dedicated work. And thank you for what you intend to do in the years to come.
Thank you so much, Olga, and thank you so much for your fantastic work. And it's been many years that we've known each other and been colleagues, and I hope we can say friends. I look forward to collaborating more with you and turning this ship around, Earthship, making sure that every single soul that comes into this world is able to thrive. So let's do it.